What kind of calculating cold act did you commit? Story 1. I worked for a guy as a security guard for a .com company in 2000. He wouldn't pay overtime, demanded 60-plus hour work weeks, and would call you in on your days off. I refused one time and he terminated me. I returned all my uniforms and he charged me $180 cleaning fees. Out of a job, I talked to the building facility manager about some of the shady shit I saw him doing. He told me if I had my own security license and insurance, he would terminate their contract and hire me. So that's what I did. A few days later, I'm coming in the front door and security stops me. He tells me that I've been terminated and no longer allowed on the property. The building facility manager comes out and tells him I'm there on official business with them. The following Monday, new contract in hand, I enter the front door of the property and relieved my former boss of his duties and escorted him off the property. I could see steam coming out of his ears. He was pissed. Story 2. My boss had a reputation for smashing keyboards and mice when he would get mad. So I bought a cheap wireless mouse and plugged the dongle into the back of his PC where no one would ever see it. I could look across the hall and kind of see when he was using the mouse, and I would just nudge the cursor enough that it would feel like there was something glitching. I got him to break another mouse that week. Story 3. I ran a painting company in college and did a lot of work in my own neighborhood. After completing most of the job, the neighbor called me and refused to pay at all unless the price was dropped. I explained that the only person he would be hurting would be me, as everyone else is still entitled to the money they worked for. The neighbor still demanded a price cut, which resulted in me paying to do the job. Shame he didn't get the color approved by the neighborhood HOA. One anonymous complaint later, and the neighbor had to pay to repaint it. Story 4. I was brought in as a ringer for a master's swimming team between college seasons. I didn't have much money, but they said it was cool as long as I worked to help people with their strokes and win at my events. It worked. We took second in the state at the end of summer meet and the open water competition. The team dramatically improved. After the season ended, I was planning to keep training with them for the last 2 weeks before school. The treasurer asked me for dues over the last few months, and the coach pressured me too. They both conveniently forgot our original deal after the team did so well. So, I reached out to the state swimming leadership to tell them that I was getting benefits to swim. They DQ'd the team from the results. I also referred the IRS to audit the coach since he was being paid under the table for coaching and lessons. He got audited. Maybe he shouldn't have bragged about that. Story 5. School bully showed up my work once to turn in an application. It was a cool, higher-paying job for teenagers. He asked me why I was there, and I told him I worked there. His attitude changed, and he begged me to put in a good word for him. I said, "Oh, sure thing." I walked in, went to my manager's office, and told him, "So-and-so just applied. Please don't hire him." He bullied myself and others relentlessly. My manager crumpled up his app and threw it away. Story 6. A long time ago, I was in a relationship, engaged, to someone who suffered a psychotic break. Over the course of 6 months, they stepped out of our reality and into their own. I tried to keep things together, eventually realized I couldn't, noticed the bad days outweighing the good days. I realized she needed treatment, and she was absolutely refusing it. She had a habit of calling the police over imagined slights, and I knew it was a matter of time before they hauled her off. I'd seen her scream at a handful of doctors already. I knew that it was putting the relationship at risk, but her health was more important. I was able to keep up a lie for a little over a month about her getting access to medication at the hospital in order to get her in a room with a doctor there. It took a few minutes for her to be certified and committed to the psych ward. She was there for a few weeks, diagnosed and medicated. Shortly after being released, she broke up with me, understandably. We don't talk. I hope she kept up with her medication. Story 7. A customer would come into my store and often deposited a candy bar wrapper into one of the shopping carts waiting in the entry like it was a garbage can. On many occasions he had told me how he was diabetic and only this specific errand for his wife so he could sneak his favorite candy bars. After he disappeared out of sight, I retrieved his garbage and waited. When I saw him approaching my register, I quickly dropped the wrapper in the shopping bag that I put the cans of dog food he was purchasing into. I hope he never looked in the bag and just went home and left it for his wife to put away so she would discover his sneaky snack. I do know it was several weeks before I saw him again. Story 8. When I was 17, I worked at Pizza Hut and was allowed to bring home meals. Every so often, my sister would call and ask for a personal pan. I would find new ways to hide jalapenos in it whenever she was being a bitch. She started getting good and would search for it. Some days I did nothing to it, and she'd still take it apart to make sure there wasn't a jalapeno in it. At one point, I hid it inside the crust. Unless she tore it apart, she'd never find it. We were 2 years apart in age, and she was a little asshole in HS, so it was my best version of revenge. Story 9. A kind of mid-level guy on my team/shift who'd been there for years was supposed to be my mentor/trainer. He would constantly have mood swings, harass me, say how he hates everyone in my previous department, have fits, scream and cuss at the top of his lungs, and then eventually started talking about me and my family behind my back. He would joke that everyone on his shift should be fired except him because he does all the work. He's the guy that would start rumors about everyone, including our managers/bosses. In was the worst experience of my entire career. I knew no one would believe me, except one other person who witnessed it and was also newer, because he had already been there 10 years. He also did weird stuff that I'm not going to get into. So I started taking notes, and every time he did something like this with exact dates and times, pretty much building my case. After 1 year, I sent a very professional email to my 2 top managers in the department. They opened a whole case and corroborated the story with other people in the department he had been harassing. He ended up getting suspended for a week, and warned if anything like this happens again, he will be terminated. Before you ask, yes, I tried talking to him one several times. I tried every avenue before writing that email. Story 10. I had trashy, loud redneck neighbors at a duplex who liked to let their dog shit right next to my doorstep and not pick it up. One day, my 4-year-old son stepped in it and smeared it in the house. They were the upstairs duplex, and I had the downstairs one with the backyard. Something in me snapped, and I was just done with them. I proceeded to gather my dog's pooper scooper, picked up all of the poop in my front from their dog, and some from the backyard from my dog, and promptly dropped it all on their front porch, with a note that said, "I see you are having some difficulty picking up after your dog, and I thought I would help you out. You're welcome." I then called the landlord and let him know that not only are they letting the dog shit by my front door and not picking it up, the dog barked constantly, chewed up the blinds, and chewed up the carpet. My landlord's response was, "They have a dog?" Landlord dropped in and made them pay a pet deposit, and charged them a fee for replacing the carpet and the blinds. Cost was around $2,000. I am someone who minds my own business and doesn't involve myself with others, and if they had simply walked another 30 or 40 feet to let their dog shit elsewhere, I wouldn't have said anything. But trashy rednecks have no shame. Story 11. Mom bought my sister and I 2 ice blocks as a treat for dessert. As I was putting them in the freezer, I dropped one, which broke the top above the stick. It was agreed that this was my ice block. After dinner comes, I go to get my broken ice block out of the freezer. My sister screeches. She believes I have taken the unbroken ice block and left her the broken one. I tell her that it was mine, but she wouldn't believe me. She complains to Mom, who tells me just to swap it out. My sister took my ice block, and lo and behold, it was broken. I enjoyed my rainbow paddle pop and my victory. My sister enjoyed extra salt on hers because of the tears. The best part: the diabolical scheme required no action on my part. All it needed was for my sister to be the brat that she is. Story 12. Had a coworker that would leave her spot frequently to go to the bathroom, aka go for a smoke break. We work on a conveyor belt, so I had to keep picking up her slack. If I didn't, then the belt would jam up. She would leave several times in a single shift every day, and always came back smelling like ciggy smoke. One day she left, and then the boss of the managers walked down the aisles to inspect the belts. I told her that the person next to me went out the door and had been gone for a while, so the boss went to look for her. Coworker came back immediately and apparently tried to hide behind a semi-trailer in the yard. Story 13. I worked at a chicken place years ago. Wings, tenders, and sandwiches made with tenders. Pretty laid-back place. And there was a former worker who would come in and sometimes make his own food when he ordered. He paid for it and was still on good terms with the owner and just preferred to make it himself. One day he was back making his food and I dropped a couple wings on the floor, so like any normal person, I threw them away and replaced them with fresh ones. He asked why I did that and said he used to always pick up food he dropped and served it. I told him that was fucking gross and he just shrugged. So a month or so later he placed an order and was coming to pick it up, which meant I was making his food and not him. I am proud to say that all of his food touched the nasty-ass floor before going in the container. Story 14. When I was leaving America to come home to Australia after finishing a 6-month overseas secondment, the other seconded, who had been a backstabbing piece of shit the entire time, was scheduled to fly back with me. The night before our very early flight home, I took him out to drinks and got him wasted, checked into his flight, turned his phone alarm from AM to PM, put his phone on DND mode, and dropped him back at the hotel. At 4 a.m., when in my cab to the airport, I casually called him about 60 times knowing he'd never see the calls, left him half a dozen voice emails, and took the most relaxing flight home. Story 15. I talked a coworker into quitting her job. She was really horrible. We worked at a preschool and she was terrible with the parents and children. The owner did not want to fire her. She came to me and told me about a position she saw. I told her she should really take it because she just doesn't know what's going to happen with us, and if she doesn't take it now, she may lose the opportunity. She quit, and we all breathed a sigh of relief. Story 16. When I was a kid, I took my Game Boy and Pokemon game to the park while my little brother had a soccer game. Turns out there was another kid there who had also brought their Game Boy, but they had a link cable. We talked for a bit and eventually he asked if I would help him trade evolve his Haunter. I of course said yes. We watched it evolve into Gengar together on my Game Boy, both of us in awe. I unplugged the link cable and said, "Crap, I think I hear my mom calling me to leave," and then I ran off as fast as I could. This was over 20 years ago, and it still haunts me to this day. Truly unforgivable. Story 17. When I was 4 or 5 years old or something, I had words with a kid in school and we were like on non-speaking terms. Then eventually he was going to apologize, but I just didn't like him, so I hid a rock in my sleeve and stabbed his hand when we were about to shake hands. 25 years later, I still feel kinda bad, lol, so out of character for me to do something like that. But I know that I can be the person who does that if needed. So that's nice, I guess. Better watch out, Putin. If we ever shaking hands, expect a rock, lol. Story 18. I was around 7 or 8 years old and standing in line at the cafeteria at school to get some soup. I had my hands in my pockets and there was some sand and that weird fluff, so I took a pinch of it, collected my soup, and while making my way to my table, I put that sand in a soup of a girl I absolutely hated. She thought I was joking, so when I sat down, she came to my table and pretended to also put something in my soup. I immediately ratted on her lmao. Story 20. My brother's ego could never accept that I finished HS, college, and moved to another continent. He had big dreams for himself, but was never disciplined enough to follow through. We are not on speaking terms because he turned into a conspiracy theory idiot who is struggling financially. He is also a big F1 fan. My husband and teen are as well. My husband and teen traveled to Canada to watch a race last year and accidentally met some of the drivers, got autographs, etc. My cold act. I blasted the pictures on social media so my brother saw them. Story 21. Started to hang out with a friendly, awkward guy I met on my rec league team. He was nice to me, but let slip that he thought all Mexicans were drug dealers and that all homeless people should be shot. I still hung out with him because he didn't have anyone else and was clearly desperate for friends. He confided in me that recently he'd begun suffering from seizures. While giving me the basics on how to provide first aid if it happened, he emphatically asked that I not permit an ambulance to be called. If he ended up in a hospital from a seizure, he would lose his driver's license. A few weeks later, we were playing a rec league game when suddenly he hit the ground. Hard. He was having a seizure. Everyone was in shock. I realized he hadn't confided in anyone else about this. Not other teammates, not our coach, just me. I directed everyone according to what he had told me. Roll him on his side, don't try to pin him in place, time the seizure with a watch. Should we call an ambulance? Someone asked. There was blood in his mouth. I told them to call the ambulance. I rode with him to the hospital. I sat by his side and talked with him once he was cogent again. My excuse was the blood. Turns out he'd just bit his tongue in the fall, but for all I knew it was something worse. I told him I hadn't wanted to take the chance. He told me, sadly, that he understood why I'd done it. He lost his driver's license, he lost his job, he had to leave the area and move back home with his parents. What I'd told him was true, but not the whole truth. I was pretty certain the blood was from his tongue, but mostly, while I watched him seize, I was picturing it happen while he was behind the wheel of a car. I knew what I was doing when I made the call. Even when I was sitting in the hospital with him, I didn't regret it, and 9 years later, I still believe I would do it again. What keeps me awake at night is the thought, what if he hadn't been an awkward, ignorant racist? Would I still have made the same decision? Story 22. I had already found out my fiancée at the time had spent one night at her ex's earlier in our relationship. I obviously knew what had happened, but just wanted the satisfaction of making her admitting it. I had already settled the lease, made arrangements to move out, and already notified my parents. And yet I convinced her the only way I could move past it is her telling me the full truth. Otherwise, I'm calling it off and telling our parents the reason. She ended up fessing up under the threat of canceling it all. I went out to calm down, sent a prepared mail to her parents, and went back. The shock turned to crying rage when her parents called her. Was a nice ending. They hated her toxic ex, can only guess they weren't the biggest fans of their daughter for a time. Story 23. To this day, I don't know why I did it, but one day I just decided to violently gaslight my boyfriend. We were watching TV and an advert come on. I think for the furniture company Wayfair. At one point, BF randomly says, "What the fuck was that?" Now I genuinely wasn't paying attention, so I ask what. And he says there's some sort of monkey thing. We watch the same programs on the same channels pretty regularly, so it soon comes up again. This time I see it. Some sort of bizarre baby orangutan toy thing. But when he asks if I saw it too, I'm just like, nah. The next time he asks, I'm like, the dress? He stares at me, puzzled, as I say it was just a brown dress on a hanger. This carries on the next day, after which I decide it's probably an orangey coat hanging on a door. He is, understandably, losing his ever-loving shit. He tries to take a photo of it, but it's brief. And by the time the advert starts and he's scrambling for his phone, it's been and gone. Meanwhile, I casually insist that it's just a coat hanging up. At one point, he's on his feet, gesticulating, and I swear is close to tears. This carries on for the better part of 2 weeks, as he's haunted by this advert, and my denial of the baby orangutan. He tries to find the advert on YouTube, but no luck. Eventually, when he was on a stag do and safely tucked away in another country, I snagged a picture of the scene and sent it to him with the caption, "It's just a coat, babe." Genuinely don't know how he didn't leave me.